The reality of this shocking story begins, and we see Enzo had always been the picture of a devoted husband and father. But when he discovered the shocking truth about his wife Camilla's affair, everything changed. What followed was a tragic spiral of betrayal, rage, and an irreversible decision that would tear their family apart. Forever, Camilla and Enzo were the embodiment of a picturesque suburban life. Their marriage admired by friends and envied by neighbors they had built. Their world in the quiet town of Maplewood, a place where everybody knew everybody. Their charming home with its neatly trimmed hedges and vibrant flower beds was a testament to the stable life. They shared Camilla, a beloved high school teacher, was known for her dedication to her students, and her warm, approachable nature. Enzo, the steadfast owner of a family-run hardware store, was equally respected in the community for his hard work and kind demeanor. Together they seemed to form the perfect team. Their son Carlos was the center of their lives. A bright and energetic teenager, he brought joy to their household. Whether it was through his infectious laughter or his unwavering curiosity about the world, family dinners were a cherished ritual in the home, filled with stories of the day, laughter, and plans for the future. Weekends often meant day trips to nearby hiking trails or lazy afternoons playing board games at the kitchen table. To anyone on the outside looking in, the Enzo were a beacon of happiness and stability. But beneath the surface, subtle changes had begun to take hold. Camilla had started coming home later than usual, citing long evenings spent grading papers or attending school meetings. Enzo noticed her phone was always within arm's reach, and she guarded it closely while he tried to brush off the creeping doubts, dismissing them as paranoia. Unease settled in the pit of his senzoach. Their conversations grew shorter. The once effortless flow of words between them now replaced with awkward silences. Camilla seemed distracted, her smile no longer reaching her eyes. Enzo told himself it was just the ebb and flow of marriage, the kind of challenges every couple faces after years together. He reasoned that Camilla was stressed with her demanding job, and perhaps he should be more attent, more supportive. Yet there were moments he couldn't ignore, like the times he would laugh softly at something on her phone, only to quickly tuck it away when she noticed his gaze. It sounded like an orthodoxy, or the nights when she would excuse herself to the guest room under the pretense of wanting to work without disturbance. Despite the growing tension, Enzo never voiced his concerns aloud. Confrontation wasn't in his nature, and he feared that pressing Camilla might widen the rift between them. Instead, he buried himself in work, convincing himself that things would improve on their own. In the quiet moments, the doubts noted him. He replayed interactions in his mind, looking for clues, for signs that something had changed between them. The facade of their perfect marriage remained intact for the outside world. At church, at community events, and at Carlos's school functions, they presented a ed front, but within the walls of their home the cracks were undeniable. It was as if they were living parallel lives, close enough to see each other but too far to truly connect. Enzo couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away, but he clung to the hope that whatever was wrong could be fixed. He had no idea that the cracks in their marriage were not just the result of stress or drifting apart, but the shadow of a secret that would soon shatter their world. It was a Sunday afternoon like any other, the kind of day that brought with it the promise of relaxation and quiet. Enzo had spent the morning tending to chores around the house, trimming the hedges and fixing a loose hinge on the back gate. Camilla, as usual, was out saying she had papers to grade at a local cafe. Carlos was upstairs in his room, headphones on, immersed in a world of video games. Everything seemed ordinary, but that illusion was about to be ripped apart. Enzo settled on the couch with a cold drink, flipping through the channels on the television in search of something to pass the time. His browsing stopped when he landed on a popular daytime talk show. The program was notorious for its dramatic segments, often showcasing personal stories of betrayal and secrets. Normally, Enzo would have skipped past Ed, but something about the host's teasing introduction caught his attention. The episode promised to reveal shocking footage of an extramarital affair, and curiosity got the better of him as the segment began. Enzo watched casually, only half paying attention. The host introduced the story of a school teacher who had been caught cheating on her husband. A hidden camera had captured damning evidence submitted anonymously by someone who claimed to want justice. Enzo's heart sank slightly at the thought of a marriage unraveling so publicly. He glanced at the screen, pitying the poor man who would have to endure this humiliation. Then he saw her there on the screen was Camilla, his Camilla. She was sitting across from a man Enzo immediately recognized as Mark Rivers, a colleague of hers from the high school. They were at a dimly lit restaurant, their heads close together. Their latter intimate, the footage was grainy but unmistakable. The clip transitioned to an even more damning scene, Camilla and Mark walking hand in hand toward a hotel entrance, their body language leaving no room for doubt. Enzo froze, his mind struggling to process. What he was seeing at first, he told himself, it must be a mistake, a cruel coincidence. But as the segment continued, showing more footage and revealing details of their alleged affair, the truth became undeniable. The host narrated the events with a mix of drama and feigned sympathy, but all Enzo could hear was the pounding of his heart in his ears. Chalk gave way to a wave of emotions he couldn't control. Rage, humiliation, betrayal, all of it surged through him at once, he felt. Exposed as if the entire town had been watching his private humiliation unfold on their screens. His hands shook as he turned off the television. But the images burned in his mind, impossible to erase. News traveled fast in Maplewood, and it wasn't long before Enzo felt the weight of the community's judgment. Friends, neighbors, and even casual acquaintances seemed to look at him differently, their eyes filled with pity or curiosity. Whispers followed him. Wherever he went, a constant reminder that his once perfect life had become fodder for gossip. Enzo couldn't escape the shame. The betrayal itself was devastating, but the public nature of it made it unbearable. His marriage, his family, his very sense of identity, all of it felt like it was slipping through his fingers, and for the first time he began to wonder if the life he thought he had built with Camilla had been nothing more than an illusion. The days following the devastating revelation were a blur for Enzo. The betrayal itself had been painful enough, but the public nature of it made it feel unbearable. Everywhere he went, he felt the weight of prying eyes. At the hardware store, Enzoers who had once been friendly now approached him with awkward small talk or avoided him entirely. The whispers in the aisles were deafening. Enzo became convinced that everyone in town had seen. The footage had dissected his pain, like a scandal from some cheap tabloid. The humiliation was suffocating at home. The atmosphere was no better. Camilla's return. That night had been tense and silent. She avoided looking at him, offering no explanation, and making no attempt to bridge the gaping chasm between them. When he finally confronted her, the argument was explosive, though ultimately futile. Camilla refused to admit to anything beyond what the footage had shown. She offered no apology, no justification, only a cold silence that left Enzo more enraged and confused. She locked herself in the bedroom, leaving Enzo alone with his thoughts, his anger simmering. Just beneath the surface there, San Carlos sensed the tension but didn't fully understand its source. He had heard snippets of conversations at school about the scandal, but hadn't connected the dots to his family. He only knew that his parents were barely speaking, that his father was on edge, and that his mother seemed withdrawn. Carlos retreated into his own world, finding solace in his music and video games. He was too scared to ask questions, fearing the answers might shatter the fragile stability he clung to. For Enzo, the anger began to consume him. He started drinking heavily, something he had rarely done before. Late at night, when the house was silent, he sat in the living room with a glass of whiskey, replaying the talk show episode in his mind. The images of Camilla with Mark Rivers became an obsession. Each replay stoking the fire of his rage. He began to scour Camilla's social media accounts, scrolling through photos and posts for any hint of when the affair had started. He found nothing overt, but the lack of answers only fueled his paranoia. One night, while Camilla was asleep, Enzo rummaged through her belongings. He searched her phone, her laptop, her desk drawers, anything that might give him clarity. What he found was worse than he had imagined. Emails and text messages between Camilla and Mark painted a vivid picture of an ongoing relationship. They were filled with inside jokes, plans for secret rendezvous, and declarations of feelings that made Enzo's sensoac turn. The discovery sent Enzo into a spiral. He felt as though his entire marriage had been a lie, that the woman he had loved and trusted had been leading a double life. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was a dismantling of everything he believed about his life. His mind began to race with dark thoughts. He felt trapped, cornered by the weight of his humiliation and anger. The whispers in town, the strain. Silence at home, the betrayal etched into every message he'd read. All of it pushed him closer to the edge. He began to entertain thoughts of revenge, of making Camilla feel the pain she had inflicted on him. Enzo stopped going to work, isolating himself entirely. Friends tried to reach out, but he ignored their calls and texts. His world had shrunk to the confines of his own mind, a place where anger and humiliation festered unchecked. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think of anything but Camilla's betrayal. And as the days turned into weeks, his thoughts grew darker, in the line between pain and rage blurred beyond recognition. One evening, the storm clouds had gathered thick and heavy in the sky, casting an eerie shadow over the Enzo household. The wind howled through the trees and the rain hammered against the windows, a perfect reflection of the storm brewing inside Enzo. He sat in the living room alone and restless, staring at the phone in his hand. It had been a long, grueling week since he'd uncovered the full extent of Camilla's affair, and every day had been a struggle to keep himself together. The thoughts of revenge that had been creeping into his mind for days now felt inescapable. He had reached his breaking point. Enzo had been awake for hours, unable to shake the image of Camilla and Mark from his mind. His heart ached with betrayal, and his thoughts churned with fury. He couldn't let it go. Not after everything he had learned, not after the humiliation he had suffered at the hands of the woman he had once trusted, the way the town had turned on him, the way Camilla had retreated behind her. Silence only deepened the wound. Oh, she had shattered him, and now he would make her feel the same. When Camilla finally arrived home, dripping wet from the downpour outside Enzo was waiting for her, she didn't seem to notice him at first, too preoccupied with drying off and removing her shoes. It was only when she turned around and saw him standing in the dimly lit hallway, his face drawn and tense, that she froze. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, but neither of them had the courage or perhaps the will to speak. Camilla glanced at him, her expression unreadable, and Enzo felt a knot of anger tighten in his chest. "I saw it all," Enzo finally said, his voice low and shaky, the words slipping out like poison. The footage, the messages, the lies. Aura's face went pale, but she didn't respond. She seemed to shrink back, her eyes darting nervously around the room, avoiding his gaze. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. It was as though the woman he had once known had disappeared, leaving only a ghost behind. Enzo's anger erupted in that instant. He couldn't take the silence, couldn't take her refusal to acknowledge the pain she had caused him. He stepped forward, his voice rising with each word. "How could you do this to me, to us two?" Carlos, his chest heaved with every breath, the frustration and rage boiling over. "What about our life? Was it all a lie?" Camilla took a step back, her hands trembling, her mouth opened again, but still nothing came out. Enzo felt his grip on reality slip further, his mind consumed with the need to make her understand his pain, to make her feel it. He didn't even realize his hand had moved until he felt the cold steel of the gun he had taken from the closet, hidden away in a drawer where no one would find it. For a long moment he stood there, the gun in his hand, feeling the weight of it, feeling the gravity of what he was about to do. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside it was as if the world had gone deathly. Still, Camilla was trembling, her eyes wide, her lips quivering, the silence between them stretched long, suffocating as Enzo stared at her, his heart pounding in his chest. His vision blurred, the images of Camilla with Mark, the texts, the talk show episode, everything flooded back in a chaotic wave. His hands shook uncontrollably. It was all too much. He had been humiliated, he had been broken, and now in this moment, nothing else seemed to matter but the darkness he felt consuming him with a single movement. Enzo's finger tightened on the trigger. The sound of the shot echoed throughout the house, cutting through the tension. Like a knife, it was as if time stood still in the aftermath, the world hanging suspended in the air. Camilla collapsed to the ground, her body falling in a lifeless heap. Enzo's eyes were wide, his breath coming in shallow gasps for armament. He couldn't comprehend what he'd just done, the magnitude of his action, hitting him with the force of a freight train. Carlos's voice pierced through the fog of his thoughts, a shout from the hallway that made Enzo's blood run cold. It was too late, the damage had been done. The sound of Carlos's voice, frantic and confused, sent a chill through Enzo's spine. He froze, standing over Lord's lifeless body, unable to move for a long moment. Everything felt surreal, as if he were trapped in a nightmare from which there was no waking. The gun still gripped tightly in his shaking hands felt like an alien object, something that no longer belonged in this house or in his life. Enzo's mind raced. But it was as if the gravity of the situation had not fully sunk in. The storm raged on outside, but inside the house it was eerily quiet, save for the pounding of Enzo's heart in his ears. Carlos's voice called out again, this time louder, more urgent. "Dad, what's going on?" The door to the living room creaked open, and Carlos stepped into the hallway, his eyes widening as he saw his mother on the floor. For a split second, the world seemed to stop, and Enzo saw his son, his innocent, confused son, staring at the horror in front of him. "Carlos, get back to your room," Enzo shouted, his voice breaking, but it was too late. The damage was done. Carlos didn't move. He simply stood frozen, his eyes wide with fear and confusion, his mouth open but no words came out. Enzo's heart sank, and in that moment he realized the full extent of what he had done, not just to Camilla, but to his son, to the family they had built. Enzo wanted to reach out to pull Carlos close, to somehow undo the devastation he'd caused, but his body felt paralyzed. The terror in Carlos's eyes mirrored his own inner horror. In that instant, he saw himself not as the betrayed husband, but as Theman, who had destroyed everything in armament of blind rage. Enzo went to Jay. The sound of sirens grew louder in the distance, cutting through the silence. Neighbors had heard the gunshot. The police would be here soon. Enzo knew there was no escaping the consequences of his actions. The reality of what he had done crashed over him like a wave. His anger, his pain, his humiliation. They had all led to this moment, this irreversible tragedy. Within minute, the door burst open. Officers flooded into the house, their voices commanding and urgent. They ordered Enzo to drop the weapon, which he did without hesitation. Hands trembling, he complied with their commands, his mind still spinning. Carlos was quickly ushered into the care of a neighbor.